The second thing that we're going to look at under Indigenous knowledge is to develop a contrast with the idea of the reductionist, compartmentalized, and specifically classified aspect of Western science, that rationality part. And the way we describe this in Indigenous knowledge is holistic. It's a holistic approach to describing the world. Which means then, when you start describing the world, there's two things in particular that are most important. First of all, we have to look at it from the perspective of relationship. Nothing in this world exists unto itself. Everything is in existence in relation to something else. I am a male because there's females out here in the world. I am myself because there are other humans out there in the world. The water in this picture that we're looking at is defined not just by its own existence as water, but because the rocks and the plants have a relationship with that water. And so everything is defined relationally. And this prevents us from, and this actually keeps us from simply looking at one small component. This means that we also have to look not just at the component, but we also have to look at how that component is related to other things in the immediate environment, and even the extended environment as we go along. When things are relationally defined, their definition is not simply what they are in their own particular characteristics, but those characteristics are put into the context of the role that that particular plant, animal, rock, mountain, stream, river, ocean, snowflake, whatever it may be, whatever relationship that has to the whole is what defines that thing. It's not defined just by its own individual properties. And this is a real challenge for the West because they've looked at things as the smallest component. They look at things from a perspective, or Western science looks at something from a perspective of you can know everything about something if you just simply look at it. But that's not true. You have to look at it and its relationship with those other things around it that help define its role in the greater environment. Now, having things holistically and relationally defined then means that as we look at anything, we have to come at it from a systems perspective. Now, this is something that came into vogue in the 60s and 70s when people began to look at how it started off primarily in the computer world as people were trying to figure out things about computers and how they work and their relationship with other aspects of the computer in order to optimize the impact of the computer. And then people began to move away from just simply using a systems analysis on computers, but they began to look at organizations, they began to look at cultures, they began to look at political systems. And so the whole idea of systems analysis is something that the West is beginning to look at very seriously, but it's one of those things that's always been part of indigenous knowledge. That is, you can't look at one thing and understand the whole. You have to understand the whole, or you have to see the whole in order to understand one thing. So the systems-based approach is a very, very important and practical. That's the big word for holistic indigenous knowledge, is the value of the application of the knowledge, the pragmatism involved, the practical application of the knowledge becomes very, very important when you're looking at a systems approach, because You're looking at how does something work within the context of all these other things that it's a part of. And if you pull this one thing out, how is it going to impact the rest of those entities that make up that particular system? And like I said, just as the West is beginning to understand this and looking at it outside of just the computer world, it has always been part of the process for understanding the world through indigenous knowledge. It's just something people saw over generations and generations of observation, that everything's defined by those things around it. Now, that's probably the second important aspect of indigenous knowledge. The third one, I'm going to speed this up a little bit. The third one is what we'd call a spiritual dimension. What is this connection that we have with other things? We know that we have a connection with the cow because we eat their meat, or with the corn because we eat their flesh through the cornmeal or through the cornflakes we had for breakfast this morning. That's on a physical level. Is there a spiritual level? And every tribal community acknowledges a spiritual level. It acknowledges that there is something that cannot be measured, but that exists. And it's always been that way in the sense of tribal communities. We've always used prayer and ceremony and meditation as aspects of how we connect and reinforcing our connection to other parts of this world that we live in, even though they're physical, and we may be standing right next to them. We may be standing right next to a pine tree, but we still connect to them on an energy level or on a spiritual level based in our prayer and our meditation and our ceremony. And this is a dimension of science, or a dimension of knowledge, that's not recognized by Western science. The Western science is still trying to figure out how do you describe the existence of anything that can't be measured. And of course, spirit falls within that context. So this is another one of those 180-degree departures from Western science. It is this whole idea of the spiritual dimension as being a part of the knowledge that we hold, that knowledge that provides us our food, our clothing, our shelter, our communications, our relationships, enhances our relationships. All of these things are based in not only the physical thing that we experience, the material world, but also that spiritual dimension. So we see here that there's quite a number of places that there's a 180-degree separation between Western science and indigenous knowledge. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to go ahead and close this section out, and there's one more component to this lecture series, and it's going to be on natural law, and it's going to be the last one. And we're going to talk a little bit about on natural law for about 10 minutes to put the Oren Lyons piece into some form of a little bit more understanding of what natural law is. But this whole conflict between comparison conflict between Western science and indigenous knowledge is really based in the philosophical worldviews of indigenous people and the West, which are very often very, very different.